The air was thick with tension as Jessica stared down the imposing figures of the HOA board. Their steely gazes bore into her, daring her to defy their demands. "You have until the end of the week to remove that security camera from your property," the HOA president, Karen, spat, her manicured nails tapping against the mahogany table. "It's a violation of our community guidelines." Jessica's heart raced, her mind a whirlwind of defiance and fear. "But that camera is the only thing protecting my family," she pleaded, her voice wavering. Karen's lips curled into a sinister smile. "Then you should have thought about that before you installed it without permission. The rules apply to everyone, Jessica. No exceptions." The other board members nodded in agreement, their faces set in stone. Jessica knew that fighting them would be futile. The HOA had become a force to be reckoned with, a corrupt entity that wielded power over the lives of every homeowner in the community. Defeated, Jessica watched as the board members filed out of the room, their expensive suits and designer handbags a stark contrast to the growing unease in her stomach. She had no choice but to comply, lest she face the wrath of the HOA and the consequences that came with it. Days passed, and Jessica reluctantly removed the security camera from her property, her heart heavy with the knowledge that she was sacrificing her family's safety for the sake of her home. The camera had been a source of comfort, a watchful eye that kept her loved ones secure. Then, just a week later, the unthinkable happened. Jessica's car, parked in the driveway, was vandalized, the windows smashed, the tires slashed. She rushed to the scene, her hands trembling, and her mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. Suddenly, a familiar figure approached, her face etched with panic. It was Karen, the very woman who had demanded the removal of the security camera. "Jessica, please," Karen begged, her eyes wide with desperation. "I need your help. Someone vandalized my car last night, and I had no idea who did it. Do you have any footage from your camera?" Jessica's jaw dropped, her disbelief palpable. "But you told me to remove that camera," she stammered, her voice laced with a mixture of anger and confusion. Karen's expression shifted, her features contorting with a blend of shame and desperation. I know," she said, her voice quivering. "But this is an emergency. Please, Jessica, I need that footage. My card is ruined, and I have no idea who could have done this." Jessica stood there, torn between a desire for justice and a sense of bitter irony. The very people who had forced her to sacrifice her family's security were now begging for her help, their own privilege and entitlement on full display. "I'm sorry, Karen," Jessica said, her voice cold and unwavering. "But I don't have that footage anymore. You made me take down the camera, remember?" The color drained from Karen's face, and Jessica could see the panic and fear etched in her features. The tables had turned, and the HOA's iron grip on the community was suddenly under threat. As Jessica walked away, leaving Karen to grapple with the consequences of her own actions, she knew that this was just the beginning of a power struggle that would shake the very foundations of the HOA's dominance. The tension in the air was palpable as Jessica returned home, her mind still reeling from the confrontation with Karen. The HOA president's desperate plea for help had left her feeling both vindicated and uneasy. Jessica knew that this was just the beginning of a much larger battle. The HOA's grip on the community had become increasingly oppressive, and she was determined to find a way to fight back. As she stepped through the front door, her husband, Michael, rushed to her side, his face etched with concern. "What happened?" he asked, his eyes scanning her for any signs of distress. Jessica quickly filled him in on the events that had transpired at the HOA meeting, watching as his expression shifted from one of worry to one of outrage. "They made you take down the security camera," Michael exclaimed, his fists clenching in anger. "After all the break-ins and vandalism we've had to deal with, that's unacceptable." Jessica nodded, her own frustration bubbling to the surface. "And then Karen had the nerve to come begging me for the footage when her car got vandalized," she said, shaking her head in disbelief. Michael let out a humorless laugh. Of course she did. The HOA thinks they can do whatever they want, and they don't care who they hurt in the process. The couple stood in silence for a moment, their minds racing with the implications of this latest development. They knew that the HOA's actions were not just about a security camera. They were part of a larger pattern of control and manipulation. "We can't let them get away with this," Michael said, his voice resolute. "We need to fight back, Jessica. We need to expose the corruption and the abuse of power." Jessica nodded, her own determination hardening. "I'd agree, but we have to be careful. The HOA has deep pockets and powerful connections. They won't go down without a fight." The two of them began to devise a plan, brainstorming ways to gather evidence and build a case against the HOA. They knew that it wouldn't be easy, but they were willing to do whatever it took to protect their home and their community. As the days passed, Jessica and Michael worked tirelessly, collecting data and reaching out to other homeowners who had been affected by the HOA's heavy-handed tactics. They discovered a web of corruption and nepotism, with the board members using their positions to enrich themselves and their allies. Meanwhile, the tension in the community continued to escalate. Rumors of the HOA's misdeeds began to spread, and homeowners grew increasingly distrustful of the organization that was supposed to be serving their best interests. Then, just when things seemed to be at a boiling point, a shocking revelation came to light. Jessica and Michael stumbled upon evidence that the HOA president, Karen, had been funneling funds from the community's maintenance budget into her own personal accounts. The discovery was like a match to a powder keg, and the community erupted in outrage. Homeowners flooded the HOA's offices, demanding answers and calling for Karen's resignation. In the midst of the chaos, Jessica and Michael stood their ground, their carefully collected evidence in hand. They knew that this was their chance to finally take down the corrupt HOA and restore some semblance of justice to their community. As the confrontation reached a fever pitch, Karen's carefully crafted facade began to crumble. The once confident HOA president found herself on the defensive, her desperate attempts to justify her actions only serving to further incriminate her. With the community united in their anger and determination, Jessica and Michael knew that the tides were turning. The HOA's reign of terror was coming to an end, and a new era of accountability and transparency was about to begin. But as the dust settled, they both knew that the battle was far from over. The HOA had been a powerful force in the community for years, and they would not go down without a fight. The revelation of Karen's corruption had sent shockwaves through the community, and the homeowners were determined to see that justice was served. Jessica and Michael found themselves at the center of a growing movement, their once quiet suburban neighborhood now a battleground for a high-stakes power struggle. As the outraged residents converged on the HOA's offices, Jessica and Michael stood tall, their evidence in hand. They had painstakingly documented the board's misdeeds, from the embezzlement of funds to the blatant disregard for the community's well-being. Karen, her carefully crafted facade now shattered, desperately tried to defend her actions, but the overwhelming tide of public opinion was against her. Homeowners demanded her resignation, and the pressure only continued to mount as more and more residents joined the fight. In a last-ditch effort to save her position, Karen turned to the HOA's legal team, hoping to use the community's own bylaws against them. She argued that the security camera Jessica had been forced to remove was a clear violation of the HOA's rules, and that the community's actions were therefore illegitimate. But Jessica and Michael were one step ahead. They had anticipated this move and had already enlisted the help of a savvy attorney who specialized in homeowners' rights. "The HOA's bylaws are clear," the attorney stated, his voice firm and confident. "They cannot arbitrarily enforce rules that put the safety and security of homeowners at risk. The removal of that security camera was a blatant abuse of power, and it will not stand up in court." Karen's face twisted with rage as she realized that her legal maneuver had backfired. The community's resolve only strengthened, and the calls for her resignation grew louder and more insistent. Sensing that the tide was turning against her, Karen made a desperate play. She called an emergency meeting of the HOA board, intent on using her remaining influence to rally the other members against the insurgent homeowners. But Jessica and Michael were one step ahead once again. They had been carefully cultivating allies within the board, and when the meeting convened, they were shocked to find that several of the members had already defected, joining the growing anti-HOA movement. Karen's face turned an unnatural shade of red as she realized that her power base was crumbling. She lashed out, accusing the defectors of betrayal and threatening them with legal action. But the homeowners were not to be intimidated. They stood firm, their voices united in a chorus of outrage and determination. They knew that they had the moral high ground, and they were willing to fight tooth and nail to reclaim their community. As the meeting descended into chaos, Jessica and Michael watched with a mixture of satisfaction and trepidation. They knew that this was just the beginning of a long and arduous battle, but they were buoyed by the knowledge that they were on the right side of history. In the end, the HOA board was forced to concede defeat, with Karen and several of her closest allies resigning in disgrace. The community erupted in cheers, their spirits lifted by the knowledge that they had stood up to the oppressive forces that had threatened to consume them. But as the dust settled, Jessica and Michael knew that the real work was just beginning. They had won a crucial battle, but the war for control of their community was far from over. The HOA had been a powerful force for years, and they would not go down without a fight. Determined to maintain their momentum, Jessica and Michael began to plan their next move, their eyes fixed on the horizon as they prepared to take on the full might of the HOA's legal and political arsenal. The resignation of Karen and her closest allies had sent shockwaves through the HOA, but Jessica and Michael knew that the battle was far from over. The organization still had deep pockets and powerful connections, and they were not about to relinquish their grip on the community without a fight. As the new interim HOA board took over, Jessica and Michael worked tirelessly to build their case, gathering evidence and rallying more and more homeowners to their cause. They knew that they would need strength in numbers if they were to take on the full might of the HOA's legal and political machine. The tension in the community was palpable, with homeowners torn between a desire for change and a fear of the unknown. The HOA had been a fixture in their lives for so long that the prospect of life without its domineering presence was both exciting and unsettling. Jessica and Michael, undaunted by the challenges ahead, pressed on, determined to expose the full extent of the HOA's corruption and to restore power to the people. They knew that their fight was not just about a security camera or even the misuse of community funds. It was about the very soul of their neighborhood. As the days turned into weeks, the battle intensified, with the HOA employing every trick in the book to maintain its grip on power. They filed lawsuit after lawsuit, using the community's own bylaws to stall the progress of the anti-HOA movement. But Jessica and Michael refused to be deterred. They had assembled a formidable team of legal experts and community organizers, and they were determined to see this fight through to the bitter end. The turning point came when they uncovered evidence of the HOA's involvement in a shadowy real estate scheme, one that had allowed them to profit from the forced sale of homeowners' properties. The revelation sent shockwaves through the community, and suddenly, the tide began to turn in Jessica and Michael's favor. Homeowners who had once been on the fence now rallied to their cause, outraged by the HOA's blatant disregard for their well-being. The media soon caught wind of the story, and suddenly, the battle for control of the community was playing out on a national stage. The HOA, sensing that their grip on power was slipping, resorted to increasingly desperate measures. They attempted to intimidate homeowners, threatening legal action, and even going so far as to vandalize the homes of those who dared to defy them. But Jessica and Michael refused to be cowed. They stood firm, their resolve only strengthening in the face of the HOA's tactics. They knew that they were fighting for something greater than themselves, and they were willing to put everything on the line to see it through. As the battle raged on, the community became a hotbed of activity, with homeowners organizing protests, rallies, and even civil disobedience campaigns to show their defiance of the HOA's rule. The interim HOA board, their own power now hanging by a thread, scrambled to regain control, but their efforts were met with steadfast resistance. Jessica and Michael, buoyed by the support of their neighbors, pressed on, their sights set on a future where the community was free from the tyranny of the HOA. In the end, the battle came down to a dramatic showdown in court, with the fate of the community hanging in the balance. Jessica and Michael, their evidence airtight and their arguments persuasive, presented a case that was simply too compelling for the judge to ignore. As the gavel came down, signaling the HOA's defeat, the courtroom erupted in cheers. Jessica and Michael, their faces etched with triumph, embraced as the weight of their victory finally sank in. But they knew that the fight was far from over. The HOA, with its deep pockets and powerful connections, would not go down without a fight. The battle for control of the community was just beginning, and Jessica and Michael were more determined than ever to see it through to the end. The HOA's defeat in court was a monumental victory for Jessica and Michael, but they knew that the war was far from over. The organization, now led by a new interim board, had vowed to fight tooth and nail to regain control of the community. As the dust settled, the homeowners found themselves in uncharted territory. They had successfully toppled the HOA's corrupt regime, but now they were faced with the daunting task of rebuilding their community from the ground up. Jessica and Michael, buoyed by the support of their neighbors, took the lead in this effort, using their newfound leverage to enact sweeping changes. They knew that the road ahead would be long and arduous, but they were determined to create a community that was truly responsive to the needs and desires of its residents. One of their first orders of business was to reinstate the security camera that had been the catalyst for the entire uprising. They knew that the safety and security of their community was of paramount importance, and they were not about to let the HOA's heavy-handed tactics put their loved ones at risk. As the camera was reinstalled, Jessica and Michael felt a sense of relief wash over them. They had fought hard to reclaim their right to protect their home and their family, and they were not about to let that victory slip away. But the HOA was not about to go down without a fight. The interim board, now led by a new president who had been handpicked by the organization's old guard, began to mount a relentless campaign to undermine the progress that Jessica and Michael had made. They filed a series of lawsuits challenging the legitimacy of the community's new governance structure and arguing that the HOA's bylaws still gave them the right to dictate the rules of the neighborhood. Jessica and Michael, their legal team working overtime, fought back with every ounce of their. The battle for control of the community had become a war of attrition, with both sides unwilling to back down. Jessica and Michael, buoyed by the support of their newfound ally, the local entrepreneur, continued to push back against the HOA's relentless legal attacks. As the months dragged on, the strain on the community was becoming increasingly palpable. Homeowners found themselves caught in the crossfire, torn between their desire for change and their fear of the unknown. Jessica and Michael knew that they needed to find a way to rally the community once again, to reignite the passion and determination that had fueled their initial uprising. They knew that the HOA was counting on the homeowners' weariness to eventually wear them down, and they were determined not to let that happen. It was during this time that they stumbled upon a crucial piece of evidence, a trove of documents that revealed the HOA's deep ties to a network of shady real estate developers. The revelation was a bombshell, and it quickly became the centerpiece of their legal strategy. Armed with this new information, Jessica and Michael launched a renewed assault on the HOA, filing a series of lawsuits that threatened to expose the organization's web of corruption and collusion. They knew that if they could break the HOA's stranglehold on the community, they could finally pave the way for a new era of transparency and accountability. The HOA, sensing the looming threat, responded with a desperate gambit. They began to systematically target the homeowners who had been most vocal in their opposition, using a combination of intimidation tactics and legal threats to try and silence them. Jessica and Michael, their resolve only hardening, rallied the community once again, urging their neighbors to stand firm and resist the HOA's attempts at coercion. They knew that the battle was far from over, but they were determined to see it through to the end. As the legal battle raged on, the community found itself caught in the eye of a media storm. News outlets from across the country descended on the neighborhood, drawn by the high-stakes drama and the potential implications for homeowners' rights nationwide. Jessica and Michael, thrust into the spotlight, used the attention to their advantage, leveraging the media coverage to amplify their message and to rally even more support for their cause. They knew that the eyes of the nation were on them, and they were determined not to let their community down. But the HOA was not about to go down without a fight. They deployed a team of high-powered public relations experts who worked tirelessly to smear Jessica and Michael's reputation and to cast doubt on the validity of their claims. The community found itself in the midst of a heated propaganda war, with both sides vying for the hearts and minds of the homeowners. It was a battle for the very soul of the neighborhood, and the stakes had never been higher. As the conflict escalated, tensions within the community began to boil over. Homeowners found themselves divided, with some siding with Jessica and Michael and others remaining loyal to the HOA. The once peaceful streets were now the site of heated confrontations and even occasional acts of vandalism. Jessica and Michael, their own nerves fraying, knew that they needed to find a way to bring the community back together. They organized a series of town hall meetings, inviting homeowners to voice their concerns and to share their visions for the future of the neighborhood. The response was overwhelming, with hundreds of residents showing up to participate in the discussions. It was clear that the community was hungry for change and that they were willing to fight for it. With renewed energy and determination, Jessica and Michael pressed on, their legal team working around the clock to build an airtight case against the HOA. They knew that the battle was far from over, but they were more determined than ever to see it through to the end. As the legal battle between Jessica and Michael and the HOA dragged on, the community found itself in the throes of an intense and often bitter conflict. The once peaceful neighborhood had become a battleground, with emotions running high and tensions threatening to boil over at any moment. Despite the challenges, Jessica and Michael remained steadfast in their determination to bring down the corrupt HOA regime. They knew that the stakes were higher than ever, and that the future of their community hung in the balance. Their newfound ally, the local entrepreneur, had proven to be a crucial asset, providing the financial and legal resources needed to take on the HOA's formidable legal team. With his support, Jessica and Michael were able to mount an even more aggressive legal strategy, one that sought to expose the full extent of the HOA's corruption and collusion. As the trial proceedings wore on, the community found itself captivated by the high-stakes drama unfolding before them. Homeowners packed the courtroom, eager to witness the climactic showdown between the forces of change and the entrenched powers of the HOA. Jessica and Michael, their nerves fraying but their resolve unbroken, presented a case that was both meticulous and compelling. They methodically laid out the evidence they had gathered, revealing a web of corruption and abuse that stretched far beyond the boundaries of their community. The HOA, sensing the tide turning against them, fought back with everything they had. They brought in a team of high-powered lawyers and PR experts who worked tirelessly to discredit Jessica and Michael's claims and to sow doubt in the minds of the homeowners. It was a battle of wills, with each side unwilling to back down. The courtroom became a cauldron of tension, with heated arguments and tense exchanges punctuating the proceedings. As the trial dragged on, the community found itself increasingly divided. Some homeowners remained steadfast in their support of Jessica and Michael, while others, weary of the constant conflict, began to lean towards the HOA's promises of a return to normalcy. Jessica and Michael knew that they needed to find a way to bridge the divide and to unite the community once again. They organized a series of grassroots outreach campaigns, going door to door to engage with their neighbors and to listen to their concerns. The response was overwhelmingly positive, with many homeowners expressing a newfound sense of hope and determination. They saw in Jessica and Michael a vision for a community that was responsive to their needs and values, one that was free from the oppressive grip of the HOA. Buoyed by this renewed energy, Jessica and Michael redoubled their efforts in the courtroom, presenting a case that was both legally sound and emotionally compelling. They knew that they were fighting not just for their own homes, but for the very soul of their community. As the trial reached its climactic conclusion, the tension in the air was palpable. The judge, having heard the evidence and weighed the arguments, retired to consider his verdict. The wait was agonizing, with both sides anxiously awaiting the ruling that would determine the fate of the community. Jessica and Michael, their hands clasped together, held their breath, their hearts pounding in their chests. Finally, the judge emerged, his face impassive. He delivered his verdict, and the courtroom erupted in a cacophony of cheers and gasps. Jessica and Michael, their faces alight with triumph, embraced as the realization of their victory sank in. They had done it. They had taken down the corrupt HOA and reclaimed their community. But as the dust settled, they knew that the real work was just beginning. The community had been deeply divided by the conflict, and it would take time and effort to heal those wounds and to build a new, more equitable future. The judge's verdict was a resounding victory for Jessica and Michael, but the true test of their success would come in the aftermath. The community, deeply scarred by the bitter conflict with the HOA, now faced the daunting task of rebuilding and healing. As the news of the HOA's defeat spread, homeowners flooded the streets, celebrating the long-awaited triumph. Jessica and Michael, their faces alight with a mixture of relief and pride, were hailed as heroes, their tireless efforts to expose the organization's corruption finally paying off. But amid the jubilation, there was also a palpable sense of uncertainty. The HOA, though defeated in court, still had a significant presence in the community, and many homeowners feared that the organization would regroup and attempt to regain its power. Jessica and Michael, acutely aware of the challenges that lay ahead, knew that they needed to act quickly to consolidate their victory and to chart a new course for the community. They convened a series of town hall meetings, inviting homeowners to share their visions and concerns for the future. The response was overwhelming, with hundreds of residents eager to have a voice in shaping the direction of their neighborhood. Through these discussions, Jessica and Michael began to formulate a plan for a new, more inclusive, and responsive governance structure. They envisioned a community council, made up of elected representatives from across the neighborhood, that would work to address the needs and concerns of all homeowners. The idea was met with enthusiastic support, and homeowners quickly mobilized to elect their representatives. The new council, imbued with a newfound sense of purpose and empowerment, set to work dismantling the remnants of the HOA's corrupt regime. One by one, the HOA's policies and practices were overturned, replaced by a more equitable and transparent set of guidelines that prioritized the well-being of the community as a whole. Jessica and Michael, their roles as community leaders solidified, worked tirelessly to heal the divisions that had torn the neighborhood apart. They organized block parties, community cleanups, and other events designed to bring the homeowners together and to foster a renewed sense of unity and pride. The efforts were not without their challenges, however. The HOA, though defeated in court, remained a persistent thorn in the side of the new community council. They continued to file lawsuits, attempting to undermine the legitimacy of the new governance structure and to reclaim their lost power. Jessica and Michael, their resolve unshaken, met each challenge head-on, rallying the community to defend the hard-won victories they had achieved. They knew that the battle was far from over, but they were determined to see their vision for a thriving, equitable community come to fruition. As the months passed, the community began to heal, with homeowners embracing the new council and the sense of empowerment it brought. The once oppressive HOA became a distant memory, replaced by a renewed spirit of cooperation and a shared commitment to the well-being of the neighborhood. Jessica and Michael, their leadership roles firmly established, found themselves at the center of a growing movement that extended far beyond the boundaries of their own community. They became sought-after speakers and advocates, sharing their story and inspiring homeowners across the country to stand up to the tyranny of HOAs and to reclaim control of their own neighborhoods. In the end, the battle for control of the community had been a hard-fought and often bitter one. But Jessica and Michael knew that the sacrifice had been worth it. They had proven that even the mightiest of oppressors could be toppled, and that the power of a united community was a force to be reckoned with. As they looked out over the transformed neighborhood, they couldn't help but feel a sense of pride and accomplishment. The future was bright, and they were determined to make the most of it, one community at a time.